Welcome. My name is Eleni, and this is Transformational Love, Eleni's Tribe. I'm excited. Today we have with us Dr. Gala Gorman, licensed acupuncturist and naturopath, author of What's Your Kryptonite? Managing Toxic Stressors Threatening Your Superwoman Status. Dr. Gorman, I want to welcome you here today.
Thanks for having me on your show, Alana. I'm looking forward to talking to you more about how toxic stress affects women.
Thank you. I'm really excited because I want us to explore the idea of what it means to be a superwoman. What is superwoman status? And then we'll go into dis-ease and how it escalates into disease. So just kind of a little bit of my thoughts and my share here is superwoman status. Definitely been there, definitely have that preconceived idea in my head. So I'm excited to hear about what you think that is, how it's defined, and the positives and negatives around it before we move into the meat of our conversation, dis-ease and how it escalates into disease and how to prevent that. But I'm exceptionally excited to hear what you have to say. So take it away.
All righty. So let's just start by discussing Superwoman. And I've had people ask me, like, why did you take a comic book character for the focus of your book? And there's nothing comical about Superwoman. She is out there battling the world, righting all the wrongs, right? And that's kind of how we feel in our own lives a lot of the time. There's one problem, we whack-a-mole into submission, and another problem pops up right after that. And when we're trying to juggle not only what's going on with ourselves, but then probably kids, family, even, aging parents, your spouse, friends that may be going through a crisis, and then couple that with probably a career. And most of the people who resonate with this superwoman status concept are trying to juggle some form of career on top of all this other stuff that's going on. And so superwoman is that woman who literally thinks she can do it all, thinks she's invincible, thinks that she's able somehow to keep all these balls in the air. And you know what? She's right. She's done it so far, right? I mean, like, she rises to the challenge. She, manages to tame a whirlwind of what's going on in her world and dress up and go out to dinner with her husband and look the part for date night. And so, all of those aspects are departments, compartmentalizations of our lives. None of them solely are a problem. It's when they all get put together and we sort of keep adding one more thing. Oh, I can just handle this one more thing, that at a certain point, that one thing might be the straw that broke the camel's back.
Well, I think back on my own life up till now, and I think as women, we are sold this superwoman image of tying on the cape and whipping around like we're invincible at a very young age. Growing up back in the 70s and early 80s, women's rights and women's lib was on the forefront, and it almost seemed as if being a homemaker was somewhat looked down upon, that in order to add value, you need to be working outside the home as well as running your household. And I don't know if that's really where it all started or not. But I remember as I grew up per se in high school, everybody wanted to know, well, what college are you going to, right? So as young women, we're going to go get educated, something that is an opportunity we were looking forward to and excited about. And education leads to empowerment, right? The more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to make good choices. And just even through the college professors and the college experience, societal wise, culturally wise, all around me, I saw this persona that was being developed for all of us young women, that you're going to have your career, you're going to have a husband who's equally as successful intellectually, emotionally, somebody who's able to cry, who's able to show his feelings, but who is educated and smart and able to support his family equally. You don't expect him to do more, but you at least want him to do as much as you're doing. And in addition to that, you're going to be beautiful and stay healthy and fit, and you're going to take care of your family and your extended family and your friends. And it winds up being a burden on your shoulders as opposed to something you embrace, but you don't know that it's weighing you down until it's too late. And so many of us, we get told we let ourselves go, but we haven't necessarily let ourselves go. We just, like you said, we have all these balls in the air that we're trying to juggle, that we thought we would be juggling with those people that put those expectations on us, along with us embracing the expectations for ourselves, but then we wind up juggling it by ourselves. So some of the balls are going to eventually drop to the ground, right? And it's not because you're putting them on the back burner or putting them on the wayside. It's like you can only keep it up so long, but then when you stop doing it, you start feeling like you've failed, like you've let everybody, including yourself, down, right? But you're so right. I think Superwoman is the perfect example. She stands for truth. She stands for honor. She stands for beauty. She stands for strength. I mean, growing up, I remember looking at her in her invisible, I don't know if you watched the series when you were a girl, but, she was in her invisible jet. And I remember my cousins and I would, put on our aluminum foil wristbands and we would spin around and there we were, and now I'm Superwoman. We would take turns because a lot of us girls were around the same age. We were fair about it. We didn't fight remarkably, but we were Superwoman. We get the lasso of truth out, which was a clothesline that we found downstairs in the basement in the laundry. And you're cracking up, but I bet you played.
That's a great Superwoman story. I love that. So see, you started conditioning yourself from a very early age that you could do it. So, one of the things that you mentioned there is that we start seeing signs that we've let ourselves go. And so you're young, you're not of menopause years yet, but as women start to you look fantastic. So you don't look like you have 55? Is that what you said? You're 55? Mm-hmm. Yes. Wow, you look fantastic. So anyway, the effects of stress, no amount of exercise, and in fact, exercise can make matters worse. So the effects of stress offset any positives that we do. So if your stress has escalated to the point where it is eclipsing what you can do to offset it, then you're going to see that accumulate and you're going to think, I'm doing all the things, right? Exactly. I'm exercising, I'm eating healthy, I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do to keep my physical body looking, young and healthy. And you'll start to see the signs, whether that's fat accumulation in, certain areas, or just skin starts to deteriorate. All of those things accumulate, and there's very little you can do to offset that.
So let me ask you a little bit about the exercise, because I do believe that some level of exercise is healthy and it's good, but I think when you take it, and maybe you agree, let me know what your thoughts are. If you take it to the extreme and you're stressing your body as a form of relieving the stress, like you're pushing your body beyond its limits and just pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, that's when exercise becomes unhealthy.
So I will tell every patient that 30 minutes a day of some form of movement is important. If you don't have a lot of other stress going on in your life, then you may be able to do more strenuous exercise. But if you have a lot of stress going on in your life, that your cortisol is already spiking, your adrenals are on overload, then doing really high intensity exercise can actually be worse than doing some more low intensity walking, yoga. Those sorts of movements are much more beneficial than really intense exercise.
Right. So beating your body up as a form of exercise is actually when you're under so much stress,
Yes.
even though it might leave you with some kind of a high after the fact, your body's getting pushed beyond its limits and doesn't have much left to fight off everything else that's going to be coming at you from the inside or the outside. So I can see that. So some exercise is beneficial. No exercise is a bad idea, just I think as well. But
Correct.
if you're spending 3, 4, 5 hours at the gym, I personally can't imagine how that would lead to being able to leave time for other things that need to be addressed, and you're depleting your body. But again, no judgment on anybody if you're out there, if that's what you do. But I think as women, a lot of us just don't exercise. We leave that piece go, or we don't even eat healthy. Even as part of the superwoman personas, we're trying to hold it up. Those are some of the balls I think that fall to the floor the quickest, because we're so busy trying to take care of everybody else, because it's our, we get told it's our nature to be nurturers, to be caretakers, right? And I think everybody, male or female, it should be part of our nature, but that's a conversation for another day. But as part of that expectation, because I am a nurturer, that's for not just ascribed to me, eating healthy, is something that I try to do, but there are times when that gets left on the wayside. So does exercise. So if we're all being real, ladies, if you're watching out there, I'm proud of you if you can get your exercise in every day, but I'm sure there's times when we don't, but we still have way too many balls we're trying to juggle regardless. And the ones that we should keep throwing in the air, we let go of the quickest, and they're the ones that are closest to us that would be the most beneficial for us. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that the general idea is that you need to be moving your body.
Mhm.
I talk about the body as a rechargeable battery.
Okay.
And so movement is one of the ways that we recharge the battery. So the human battery essentially gets recharged with that sort of friction that we put
Okay.
our internal systems under. And so in order for us to have energy, and just energy for all of our internal systems to work, including, removing all the cellular debris from all the toxins that we have to deal with, that movement is important. But the intensity of that movement, how we're told that it has to be like at some over the top level, or it's really not having any positive impact, that is a myth and not true. And the other thing too, I think that's important to remember, is that sometimes all you need is 15 or 20 minutes. You don't need 3 hours at the gym. So
Okay, it's a great point. And back to the title of your book, What's Your Kryptonite? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
yeah, so I refer to toxic stressors as kryptonite.
Okay.
And again, it's a throwback to the superwoman story. She was also impacted by kryptonite in her world, just like Superman is. And oftentimes kryptonite can't be seen. They just
Mhm.
know that they don't feel well. They know that something's draining their energy, right? Kryptonite is there, but maybe it's hidden behind something, right? And so I think it's a fantastic analogy to use, because if we saw a toxic cesspool of something that obviously was toxic, we would steer clear of it,
Right.
right? But we don't see it. It's hidden from us. And so all we know is that something's draining our energy. We don't feel well. And because we're on this hamster wheel of maintaining our superwoman status, all these balls in the air, all these commitments that we've made, all these people in our lives that are relying on us to sort of maintain our superwoman status, we just continue to kind of push the signs that something's not right aside, and then the problems accumulate. So those signs, back to what you mentioned initially, I refer to the state of dis-ease. So disease is really just dis-ease. So normally our human body functions mostly on autopilot, and we don't have to do anything. I mean, just think about it. Right now, you're breathing, your cells are getting all the job done, you're blinking your eyes. We don't say, oh, time to blink, my eyes are feeling a little dry, right? And so all of that happens automatically, and that requires all of our internal signals to be functioning properly. And so those signals rely on these messages, and rely on our battery being charged up. And so a lot of things that we do recharge that battery. But if the battery's not charged, if things aren't operating on all cylinders, you start to see signs of that. And those signs might be just waking up in the morning and literally thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this day. Like, okay, let me roll out of bed and go straight to the coffee pot because that's the only thing that's going to keep me going today. Or at night, you are so tired and you can't go to sleep because you're just wired from all the things that you've got going on, and the open loops, I call them, that are going in your head. And no matter how tired you are, you're not getting a really good night's sleep. You may be getting headaches regularly, and normally you shouldn't get a headache regularly. I mean, a headache is a sign that something's going on internally. And when we get a headache and we reach for the pain reliever, rather than saying, oh, wow, I've got a headache, this is a sign that I need to reverse course on something. When we, reach for the pain reliever and we suppress that symptom, now all we've done is just drive those root causes deeper into the body.
So let me ask you, so then the kryptonite would be the stressors, and the dis-ease would be, let's say, the headache or the inability to sleep or the sense of exhaustion.
Yes.
So what are some of, and then I'm going to follow it up with, what can we do to, because you mentioned some like healthy habits, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So what are some of those stressors, like the balls we talked about, juggling in the air, like we kind of touched on it lightly, but what are some of those kryptonite rocks, for lack of a better word? What are some of those things that are hidden that we basically, what you're saying is we mask using ibuprofen or Advil,
or whatever pain reliever.
we just keep
a
going.
lot of times people use over-the-counter antacids when they have digestive issues, or there's a handful of common things that people turn to, but the pain reliever, ibuprofen, or one of those alternatives is the most common probably. So sources of kryptonite. So I evaluate 12 different categories of toxins. And so if you just take a few, like, let's just think about bacterial toxins. So bacteria, you don't see bacteria, right? It's not just like if you saw bacteria, you'd be like, oh, get the household cleaner out, right? And you need to clean that up. But you don't see it. It comes through on some of the foods we eat, even those really clean foods that we eat. Sometimes, if they're not washed properly or that sort of thing, we can introduce bacteria. And we have lots of bacteria in our body already. When our body is operating on all cylinders, our internal digestive system is capable of handling it, then we just kill off that bacteria as a matter of course. That's what our body is designed to do. But when we're under stress, it takes the immune system offline, because internally our body believes that it has to basically prepare itself to run from the lion, right? And so when you're running from a lion, you could care less about taking care of that bacteria you just ate, right? And so when you're highly stressed, your immune system is offline, you're not able to take care of the bacteria. So bacteria, chemicals, a lot of chemicals come into our system through lots of means, but even just, foods we eat that have ingredients that are not natural, healthy ingredients. They've got some chemical component, chemical compound component that makes it really difficult for our systems to digest. Then there's mycotoxins, mold, and that sort of thing. But probably the most toxic and hardest to deal with is emotional toxicity. And that is basically when we're dealing with issues in mostly our human relationships. Those might be relationships at work. Those might be relationships under our roof. Those might be relationships with parents or even friends that have, sort of become somewhat toxic. And so emotional toxicity is really a challenge to handle. And the thing that Western medicine, medical doctors are typically not at all trained or capable of dealing with.
Well, I would say that they're trained obviously in medicine, give you a prescription. It's mostly reactionary. It's not preventative. So what are some of those other stressors that you said there were 12?
Okay, so let's think of a few more. So fungal toxins is another type of toxin that is typically foodborne, but a lot of times it's not. I evaluate food-related toxicity. So one of the stories I share in my book is a lot of people have eliminated gluten in their diet. That's like the most popular thing to eliminate in the last few years, right? And I will say that generally speaking, eliminating gluten is not going to be bad for anybody. Gluten's not good for anybody. But my husband went vegan a few years ago, and I would not recommend a vegan diet. But when he went vegan, I hired a vegan chef to cook for us because we live very busy lives, and there was no way I was cooking, certainly not vegan, since that was not even a lifestyle that I subscribe to. And so the vegan chef was making us homemade gluten-free bread every week. And it was fabulous. She would bring it on Mondays. It was right out of the oven. Typically it was still a little warm. And so it was fabulous. And I was eating a couple of slices of this gluten-free bread. It was just like a little baguette. So the slices were pretty small, but I was eating a couple slices of this gluten-free bread with my lunchtime meal typically. And I just was noticing the signs that I notice whenever I'm typically eating gluten. And so I decided to have kind of a next level food sensitivity test run. And I already had some initial information, but I was testing out this new test that I wanted to be able to run for patients. And I ran that on myself. And one of the big things that I was having a problem with was yeast. So not so much the wheat and the gluten, but it was yeast. And so I talked to the chef about it, and she said that they put 2 to 3 times the amount of yeast in gluten-free bread to compensate for
So that can,
the ability for it to rise and that sort of thing. So
okay,
essentially, I'm eating what I thought was healthy bread, and it was twice or 3 times as toxic for me personally.
right. Okay, so really a lot of it is even getting down to the nitty-gritty of nutrition, finding out what your body responds to. I mean, I'm a big proponent of gut health, pre and
Mhm.
probiotics, and eating clean is very important. So like that for me is like new education that I didn't have, because that can contribute to yeast infections, all kinds of things.
Correct.
So would you say that sleep deprivation, because I think we glorify the people that sleep 6 hours or less and are able to accomplish more, would you say that would be one type of kryptonite, something that would cause dis-ease?
So
As
I don't think I would call sleep deprivation
self-induced.
a kryptonite, because typically it is self-induced if you're choosing to sleep less because you think you're keeping all these balls in the air and you're
Yes, that's what
fine.
I meant.
Yeah. If you are having trouble sleeping, meaning you've got some form of insomnia, a lot of patients will say, I don't have insomnia, like I sleep fine, but they're waking constantly in the middle of the night. They're not sleeping really soundly. That is insomnia. Insomnia isn't only when you wake up at 1 a.m. and you're awake staring at the ceiling for 3 hours. So I wanted to sort of put that out there first before we
Sure.
go down this
Yes.
rabbit hole of sleep, because sleep is really important. And the sort of rubber meets the road at how much you're prioritizing your rest, because all of our repair functions in our bodies happen when we're resting. And when the body's active and we've got all these things going on that is happening when we're activities of daily living, we're not doing repair work. Okay, repair work happens at night. And so if we lead a stressful life, if we've got a lot going on, if we're exercising and we've got, that kind of repair work that needs to happen, that's more reason to need to rest more as opposed to less requirement for resting. So my husband is a psychotherapist, and he has patients come in sometimes that tell him, I don't have time to sleep. I maybe get 5 hours of sleep a night.
That's
And
what
he says, yeah. And he says, okay, he says, there's not really a whole lot I can help you with until you start prioritizing sleep. And so they'll come back the next week and tell him that they don't need to come back anymore because they started prioritizing sleep. And all of a sudden, everything works better. Emotional regulation, they're feeling better. Like, everything just starts to fall into place when we prioritize our rest. Now, when you get a little further down the rabbit hole of toxicity, a lot of people aren't sleeping well, and it's not because they're just not prioritizing rest. They're prioritizing rest, but their body's not shutting down. And so what's supposed to happen when, the sun goes down, we're supposed to just naturally start producing more melatonin. As melatonin goes up, the cortisol goes down, and we just naturally get tired. When your head hits the pillow, you should fall asleep within 10 or 15 minutes, and you should sleep all the way through the night, at least 7 hours. 7 hours is enough if you're sleeping soundly. And so sometimes you'll wake up just for a few minutes needing to relieve your bladder and then go right back to sleep. And honestly, if you think back to when we were kids, the goal for our parents was to get us to not need to, wet the bed in the middle of the night, right? To be able to hold our bladder all night. And so we held our bladder all night long until at some point we couldn't do that any longer. And that's a sign of kind of internal breakdown, that you can't hold your bladder through the night. And so it's just one of those little signs, keep that in your mind. Interesting. So what should happen when we go to sleep, all those internal systems kind of shut down. Think of the hibernating bear. Does a bear get up 3 times a day during his hibernation and need to use the restroom? No, he's hibernating. He goes for like months like that, right? So we should go to sleep. We should sleep through the night. Our body has kind of shut down all those systems and switched into repair mode. And that's what's supposed to happen at night. When we're not resting and we're not sleeping through the night, then all those repair functions start to get deferred. One of the other huge issues that I think just not enough emphasis is placed on is the benefits of time restricted eating, but primarily restricting your eating window where your last intake of food is much earlier than people are currently practicing. And part of that is just the busy lives that we lead. And the next thing you know, it's after 8 o'clock at night and we're still eating.
I want to visit that in a second, but I do want to stay on the sleep. That's interesting you brought that up because I do want to ask you a couple questions. But as far as things we can do differently, as far as the sleep cycle, obviously not being able to sleep, obviously if you're not choosing to limit your hours of sleep, is that, from what you're telling me, a sign of dis-ease? Your body is saying, hello, wait, I'm here, pay attention, let's troubleshoot and figure this out. I think a lot of times I have friends who have sleep apnea, and some of them know it and are doing something about it, and some of them are in denial, but they definitely have it. And then there's things they can do, like the masks that they can put on. Now they have like the little tubes you can put in your nose to help you at night, because they're waking up feeling tired all the time. I think when you wake up feeling tired, your body's trying to tell you something. You may or may not have sleep apnea. I think it's worth finding out if you do. I'm saying this to everybody out there. I'm not a doctor, but it's worth finding out, because what people don't realize is that, and I know this because not to get into super details, but my father had sleep apnea along with some other things, and he could not deal, in his mind, he couldn't deal with the mask. This is before they came out with these much less invasive techniques now of helping you. Had he worn a mask, because the doctors even told them that it takes years off your life. And I'm saying this to you guys out there, if you have sleep apnea and you know about it, or you suspect you might, or, when you don't get it addressed or resolved, it actually takes years off your life, because it taxes your heart, because your body's not getting enough oxygen, which taxes your brain as well. So I'm kind of getting on my, what do you want to call it, my soapbox here for a minute to say that, but it's super important, which I know again, it's so important to figure out what your body's saying to you, right? It's not what you're telling us. What is my body saying? Don't just take that pain medication and numb it, or don't just ignore that you're tired and drink some coffee or some kind of power drink, right? Find out, like what I hear you saying is figure out what's happening and why it's happening, and problem solve before things go from dis-ease to disease, which is becomes the major problem, right? But you mentioned,
what ends up happening is when dis-ease escalates to disease, we're forced to hit the reset button, right? Like we don't have an option. At that point, the doctor tells us what we need to do, and we say, okay, I got to do it, right? I want to live. And whatever that diagnosis is, I don't care what the experience is. It's, you say, I want to live, tell me what I need to do. And all those balls that you had in the air just get dropped, because you've got to deal with it, right? And so what I encourage people to do is not let it get to that point.
Exactly.
When you see the signs and the symptoms accumulating, don't use the suppressors. say, whoa, I don't want somebody else telling me I need to reboot. I want to do an intentional reboot.
Exactly.
I want to take the time right now to right this ship and to make sure that, I'm able to recognize when the signs and symptoms are accumulating to the point where I'm at risk, you know?
No, I think that's really important. That's another reason I have this channel, because I think self-awareness through education is so important. I think you made a huge point there. Don't wait until you have to, all the balls are going to drop and somebody else is telling you what to do. Be proactive, troubleshoot, figure it out, educate yourself now, instead of waiting. I think,
I share this story in my book of Mike Koenig's, and he's a entrepreneur, successful, and he wrote a book. He's written a number of books, but after this whole experience that he had with cancer, he wrote a book called Cancerpreneur, because he said he was getting so many questions that
wow.
he just decided to write the book and kind of put it to rest. But
Mhm.
one of the things he shared in one of the interviews that I watched, he said that his oncologist told him that he would own him for a year,
Hmm.
meaning like, don't think you're going to do anything else. You're going to focus on anything else other than getting your cancer treatments and somehow recovering enough to come back and get another one. And that's going to go on essentially for a year. Now, that's like crazy, right? When we think we're superwoman and we've got all these things going on, like if we thought we had to literally just step away from everything we're doing for a year, if we really internalize that, we would do something now to make sure that that doesn't end up happening, right? But somehow we just keep kicking the can down the road, right?
I
He
have to
went,
agree.
he went on to say that that it took him 2 full years before he felt like he could really get like his legs underneath him again. And it was 5 years before he even started really feeling like himself again.
Wow.
So essentially, and this guy was not unhealthy. He wasn't one of those people that you're being like he's an accident waiting to happen. He was generally pretty healthy, seemed to have a great life, right? In a great relationship, that sort of thing. And so, you kind of have a stereotype idea of, oh, it won't happen to me because I've got this in my favor, right?
Hmm.
But it doesn't matter. We know internally what the signs of dis-ease are, and you
Mhm.
can't always see those from the outside. And so if we are not aware ourselves of what's going on with us, and we just are listening to the messages we're getting from the outside, and we're getting all those kudos for maintaining our superwoman status and keeping everybody else in our life happy. At some point, that's where we're headed. And just like, let's not allow that to happen. Let's just go ahead and say, oh, wow, that's a headache um, that can only point to some form of toxicity, And
Right.
so when you spoke about the sleep apnea, I never discourage somebody from going to a medical doctor and getting diagnosed. That's a fantastic first line of defense. It's really helpful to know what you're dealing with. But if a medical doctor wants to immediately prescribe something and doesn't first talk to you about diet and lifestyle changes,
Mhm.
including reducing stress and some of the changes that I talk about, and they want to just prescribe you something, and you ask them, so how long am I going to be on this prescription medication? And they look at you like you're an alien and say, well, like forever, basically, right? That's like a non-starter. Okay. Like that doctor is not your doctor. If they're not telling you that we're just going to put you on this medication short term while we kind of figure out what's really going on, then you need to look for another doctor. Take your diagnosis and continue poking around. So with
Well,
sleep apnea, if you are not practicing time restricted eating, if you are, not eating a clean diet, there's a lot of, you've probably got some form of toxic buildup that your body is trying to process when you're sleeping, which is, because that's what our bodies do. That's when our time for, repair is trying to happen. And so if your body doesn't have enough energy on board to breathe and do all that cleanup work, then you've probably got too much toxic buildup. And so rather than, you might need to use a CPAP short term, but that's not a long-term solution. The long-term solution is getting to the bottom of why you are having difficulty breathing when you're sleeping.
right. Well, that's a great point made. I think that changing how we eat and changing our habits around bedtime, or and even our thought process during that time, is a huge, obviously, and benefits of exercise promoting sleep, as long as you don't do it right before bedtime, right? So with that said, in my dad's case, I do have to say that it was not, I mean, he had a Mediterranean diet. He wasn't overweight. There were other factors, but for, I'd say, 80% of the population, I think we can do a lot more to help ourselves. And I think we're so used to somebody handing us a pill, and we look at it as a fix it, when it's not a fix it, it's a Band-Aid. I think you made a great point there. It's like, what is the source, and what can you take control of yourself? Because like you said, the gentleman you mentioned, the entrepreneur, the doctor told him, I own you for the next year. Not that I feel good about the fact that it took him 2 years to go through treatment, and then 5 years out, he was still just getting his legs under him and feeling somewhat normal. I can speak to that, and I'll keep it short. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I felt as if the doctors owned me, and they did. Everything else fell away. And when you say, if you're dropping balls, figure it out now. Well, I felt like Wonder Woman more so than Superwoman. That's what I spoke to earlier. She also has a cape. You don't want to drop the balls because you feel this pressure from everybody around you, and you put the pressure on yourself. The expectations are there that you are that person that everybody's relying on. You must be strong. And it took cancer. I mean, we're talking, you're at the red light, it changes, and there's another car coming. You can't cut through the red light, because if you do, you're going to hit somebody, and it could be really ugly. But the brakes, you can hear them squealing like they do in the movies, super loud, and then boom, crash, and that's your diagnosis. And the doctors do own you. They didn't tell me that, but I was 2-3 appointments a day, several a week. There's nothing else you can do but function to get from one treatment to the other, from one surgery to the next. And it's been a number of years for me, but I've felt similar to this gentleman. I'm glad he spoke on it, that you don't feel like yourself, or your legs are under you. But I'm glad you spoke to that. But I do want to move on to the diet. I do think it's really important that I talk about mindless eating versus mindful eating. And then I would love for you to address, we touched on sleep, we touched on the toxins we put in our body through artificial ingredients, and the chemicals we expose ourselves to, even in our homes, cleaning our homes. We've touched on so many subjects, but I think restricted eating, I think is what you called it.
Time restricted eating. Yes.
Time restricted eating. I would love for you to share on that.
So I'm an acupuncturist, and we are conditioned to really respect our circadian rhythms. And so we don't refer to it as circadian rhythms in acupuncture or in Oriental medicine, but in the sort of Western world, that's what it's known as.
Okay.
And so our bodies, honestly, are conditioned to take in food from about 7 or 8 a.m. to about 3 or 4 p.m. So when you're eating after 4 p.m., just know that you're eating in the window of time that your body's gearing up to do a great job of repair work overnight.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, when I talk to people who are trying to hold down a job and managing coming home with, kids and all that there is to do, and I tell them that they need to basically stop eating by 4 p.m. in the afternoon, or even like 6 max, as the end of your eating window, they look at me, like I'm an alien. Like, that's just simply not possible, right?
Mhm.
And so it may not be possible every day, but as many days as possible that you can not eat an evening meal. Now, if you're younger, premenopause, still having a cycle, there are some times of the month when it's more important for you to sort of nurture your hormones. But long term, skipping dinner is the best meal to skip. Most of us have heard that skipping breakfast is the meal to skip so that you can still eat dinner, and people find that skipping breakfast is easier. I'm not a big breakfast eater either, so it's easier for me to skip breakfast, but I eat my big meal in the middle of the day, which is, if you follow a Mediterranean diet, Eleni, that sounds like you do, then that is probably natural for you. But it's still, when we're eating into the evening, we're eating into our period that our bodies are trying to get themselves set up for rest and repair. And if we've got other stressors going on, then our digestive system is probably slowed down as well. So, there's this concept that if you finish eating 2 or 3 hours before bed, you're good. But if your digestion has slowed down because you have other stressors that are built up, then what would have taken 2 or 3 hours maybe takes 5 or 6, And
Well,
so,
I
yeah.
agree with you on that. I think it's also important what you eat, like inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory foods. And like I would say, bigger meal during the day, breakfast preferably, and then lunch, and then dinner, like a small meal. And I agree with you on that. I try to eat earlier versus later. Later meals are never a good idea in my book, but I mean, there's so many things we could talk about here, like like the intermittent fasting, the cell repair that goes on overnight, and even just something that ironically, we're on electronics right now, technology, the blue light that so many people don't allow when we're talking circadian rhythm, right? We don't allow our brains to shut off because we're staring at a screen all the time, especially before bed.
I had a patient that came in for an initial appointment, and I run an introductory scan called an energetic toxic burden scan. And it just gives me kind of a snapshot of all these 12 different types of toxins that I evaluate.
Mhm.
And so I showed her what her scan results were. And one of her types of toxins that was really high was geopathic stress. And so, so that basically is our EMFs and all these blue lights we're and interacting with all day, and our cell phone we carry, on our hip or in our, I see women who stuff their cell phone in their bra when they're out on a walk, and I'm like, oh no, not good.
If you do that, do not do that. I can speak to that. Nobody will ever admit it, but I used to work before work, and I would literally have my iPad on my chest, and I would be taking care of, because we ran a business on top of working full time for somebody else. I literally wound up with a tumor in the exact spot that my iPad would rest on. And when I asked my doctor, it's like, well, there are no studies to prove that that could be a cause or a risk factor, blah, blah, blah. Everybody kind of glosses over it, but please don't, if you have and I never put my cell phone in my bra, but I never considered that I could have, anyway, my
So
point
anyway,
being,
she just to finish the story because it
yes,
makes a
sorry
good
about that.
point. So she had a new boyfriend, and she had never really had problems maintaining her weight, but her weight had accumulated, and she was really frustrated because nothing she was trying was working. Like all of her old go-tos that would
Mhm.
allow her to take the weight off were not working. And so we chatted for a few minutes to try to kind of out the story. And so the story with the new boyfriend is that she had kind of adopted his eating habits and lifestyle. He ate much more processed food. He ate later at night, that sort of thing. But this geopathic stress was showing up, and I was trying to figure out like what was going on there. And she admitted that he sleeps with the TV on. So now in their bedroom, they are constantly bombarded with that geopathic stress, that geopathic field that comes out of the television. And he was a techie kind of guy, and I'm sure had really ramped up the Wi-Fi in where they lived and that sort of thing. So she was being bombarded with this geopathic stress in a way that her body had not had to manage previously before she got into this relationship. It took a little bit of time to accumulate to the point where her body couldn't handle it. But yeah, it's definitely a component. And these are what I call tricky toxins. They're invisible, right? They're kryptonite. You don't see the EMF. If we saw this like field of icky, orange energy coming at us from the TV, we'd be like, turn that thing off, right? But it's invisible. We don't see it. And remember that I mentioned that our body is essentially a rechargeable battery, right? And electrical signals, our body relies on electrical conductivity. And so electrical signals are totally dependent on this sort of electrical field that we're in. And so don't be surprised when that field gets messed up, whenever we're bombarding ourselves with these technologies that are unnatural for human bodies to exist in.
Well, yeah, because this other energy field interrupts what's going on during your rest. That totally makes sense. Plus the light, pulsing from the television. I've fallen asleep in front of a television set on the couch, and you don't really sleep. You're in and out and you don't feel rested. So that totally makes sense. So would you be a proponent of no TVs in the bedroom? I mean, I am, but
Absolutely. And
or laptops or
yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, the bedroom is a place where the door closes and you have no electronics. And I use a little clock that runs on batteries in the bedroom. It's like an atomic clock that's supposed to adjust the time when the time changes on its own. We typically have to give it a little extra support to make that happen. But in a perfect world, that would be the only electronics in the bedroom. That's really a challenge in our totally plugged in world. But if you are having trouble sleeping, two things: time restricted eating, no food or drink, water, but no food or anything to drink other than water or an herbal tea that's designed for calming, chamomile, valerian, that sort of thing, and no electronics in the bedroom. Try that for 4 to 6 weeks and see how much it improves your sleep patterns. And a few days probably isn't going to be enough. Remember, we've had this toxic buildup that our bodies have to detox. So when it finally gets a little relief, sometimes we feel worse in the short term, because our bodies are now like, oh man, I can go dig out that old like junk drawer and start like rifling through all that stuff. And, you know, it takes a while to clear out all that clutter. And, you know, it's a distant memory a couple months down the road. When you open up the drawer, it's all nice and organized, all the old junk you didn't need is gone. But in the short term, it's like there's now crap everywhere. It was just all stuffed in the drawer and you could close it and didn't have to look at it, right? And so that typically gets stored in adipose tissue, our fat stores. And so when we start doing things to try to burn that additional fat, which time restricted eating will help our bodies do, then all those toxins are also getting released and back into our system to be purged. So,
well, I'm excited. I think you gave me a lot to think about as far as self-care and maybe not juggling as many balls, like kind of reevaluating which ones need to be in the air and which ones need to be set aside instead of being dropped abruptly, right? I think
intentional reset or reboot is what I like to call it. Like, let's do it on our own terms, right? On our own schedule, on our own terms.
Can you kind of give a like a little explanation of what you mean by intentional reset?
So, let's just say you've had a really stressful day. You got all these open loops, I call them, meaning like things that are like, I need to do this and I need to do that. And oh, did I do that? And did I get that on the right list? And you know, I need to, you know, make sure I don't forget that. Let me jot it down on some scribble note somewhere. And so when we've got all these open loops happening and we're feeling that the stress escalating, maybe some symptoms are starting to show up. Pause button. I'm taking a bath. Sorry, I'm taking a bath. I'm going to bed early, and it'll all wait. It'll all still be there tomorrow, unfortunately. But I need to reset. And so I take kind of a therapeutic bath. I use Epsom salt and baking soda and food grade hydrogen peroxide. And it's really a great detoxification, purification kind of process. Another thing that I use with patients sometimes are these detox foot baths. And I have a more medical grade one here in the clinic that we use, but I have some Chinese herbs that patients can use at home. And, you know, sometimes you can just sit there and veg in front of the TV and soak your feet, you know, and, you know we can't get up and run around and try to tick things off of our to-do list if our feet are soaking in the tub. Right. So, you know, it can be, I like to use that as an example because people have in mind that I've got to take some 10-day yoga retreat in Costa Rica or I won't be able to reset. But honestly, it's all these little mini resets that we didn't do that make it imperative that the 10-day Costa Rican yoga retreat is the only thing that hopes to accomplish it, right? So
right. But when you're talking to mom with
yeah.
little kids and she's trying to take a bath and they're banging on the door and the dog's barking because he's scratching at the door and the cat's meowing and the foot bath sounds like, you know, for her that might
at least a possibility, you know, like
no, I might want to go to
at least she's still there and can like make sure nobody's killing themselves, right?
Right, exactly. So I guess it depends on what level of practicality works for you.
Sure. You've got to find something that works for you in your own life. And I don't recommend super restrictive diet for anybody typically, because food is one of the things that we really enjoy in our lives. You know, we typically share that with family or with friends. Like the whole eating ritual is a big part of our lives. And so, you know, there are some things that really are serious kryptonite for you that you just need to avoid regardless. But generally speaking, I try not to go to the extreme with anything because it has to work for you in your life and your lifestyle and what's going on for you. Because if it causes more stress to think I've got to do this, this, and this in order to like tick another box, then
Right.
you just offset any benefits that you got out of it. So, so you, most important, it's got to trigger in your mind that you are taking time for yourself. This is my way of sending a message to myself that I'm important and I can take a few minutes and reset.
That's a huge, huge point right there. I think that's the most important thing. And the other thing, I think, like Les Ball's juggling would be being able to say no to everything. You know, like everybody's like, you're the reliable one. Everybody comes to you. It's like being able to say no, not feeling like a mean person, right? But I think I want to leave it with that final point. Whatever it is that you need to do, whether it's a mini reset or extended reset, or you sit there and you reevaluate what you've been doing, your body's sending you these signals that you're in dis-ease. You know, don't wait till you have a disease, not to say you will, but you know, it could be any kind of disease. It manifests physically, emotionally, whatever, right?
Skin conditions. A lot of people have skin conditions that then, you know, they don't address, they put on some steroid cream and which is just driving the problem further into the body, and they wear long sleeve shirts or long pants or whatever. So because they're so ashamed of it, they don't want anybody to see it. And so that's one of those things that it doesn't have to be something that's really life-threatening as a
Right.
disease. It shows up in a lot of different ways and it's
Right.
unique and individual.
I really want to thank you for spending this time with us today. I mean, I feel like there's so much here that we could take any one of those topics and just like dig into it even deeper and, you know, even more, but I'm really thankful for what you shared with us in reference to dis-ease and disease and the forms of kryptonite. And that is my pet cockatiel in the background decided to join the party just now. He's excited too, because he learned a lot today as well.
Okay.
But I mean, talk about circadian rhythm. He starts to eat less around 5:30 p.m. And if you try to take him out of his little mansion in the evening, he'll hiss at you. He's not mean, but he'll be like, don't bother me. And then by 7:30, he's ready to go to sleep. So if that tells you anything, you know, if we learn from our pets or the creatures around us. But thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Eleni.
I look forward
I
to.
really enjoyed speaking to you today.
Thank you. I really, I can't say enough positives. Thank you so much.
If you want to learn more about what I offer and more about me, you can go to
Yes.
drgala.com. It's drgala.com. Super simple. So.
Absolutely. I will be going there myself. Thank you so much.
Okay.